Okay, we're going to welcome back from lunch, everyone. I hope you had the opportunity to look at lots of posters. It's a lot to absorb and grade by the end for those of us who have to grade. We're going to start our second panel of the day, which is entitled Scaling Circularity, and this is going to engage with some founders and developers of companies who are now moving to really scaling up their solutions, which are associated with circularity, and in particular how they navigate this so-called valley of death or missing middle, where it's really hard to move from the kind of bench to the pilot to the large-scale systems. Our moderator is Bob Kumpf, a managing director at Deloitte and a long-time research partner of the Andlinger Centre, and I've had the personal experience of working with Bob along with Eric Larson on our pathways towards sustainability, a roadmap for the global chemical industry, which we released in September. And really it was a fantastic experience, one that Rob Socolow wrote the foreword to and said it was the result of an extraordinarily bold and productive relationship between academia and industry. So Bob, thanks for being a catalyst for all of that. Bob has 30, 40 years in the chemical industry before joining Deloitte, so he's an old hand. And without further ado, I'm going to welcome you to kick off this next panel.
Thanks, Chris. And of course, it's our pleasure to have the after lunch panel, but I have to tell you, this is really going to be interesting. There'll be no one falling asleep at all. I'm really thrilled to be able to do this. You know, the Andlinger Center, and it was mentioned earlier, is all about translating research and innovation into real-world impact, right? And nowhere is this transition to real-world impact needed more urgently than in circularity. We heard the challenges this morning. I think from this morning's sessions, we all understand the why. We need to reduce waste, close resource loops, decarbonize. Andre, I agree, those are the two big things. And the materials that we depend on every day, the discussion of how it's related to GDP. So the challenge is the how. How do we actually take these laboratory discoveries and translate them to a commercial and global scale? So as Chris said, I'm Bob Kumpf. Yes, a veteran of many years in the chemical industry, now at Deloitte as managing director. As usual for these meetings, we have three very experienced panelists with us, and each is going to bring a distinct perspective on scaling these technologies that can close loops and build more circular systems. So from this side, welcome Adam Gross, Senior Carbonization Specialist at the Andlinger Center. But as noted in the program, prior to his move to Princeton, he spent over 12 years in research and development here in New Jersey at ExxonMobil, working on strategy, development, deployment of processes and products for energy and the petrochemical sector. So a great background. Then we have Zara Summers, Chief Strategy Officer at LanzaTech. If you don't know LanzaTech, you'll be fascinated by their story. Previously, Zara served as LanzaTech's Chief Science Officer, where she led the company's R&D pipeline during their period of growth, quite germane to what we're going to talk about, initiating projects with commercial partners, securing government funding, important, and deploying LanzaTech's technology for up to 6 plants now. I think she's going to talk about that. And then there, Jen Wolfsmith, now Vice President of Sustainability at Nova Chemicals. Recently, though, Jen had a very interesting job. She served as Chief of Staff to the CEO and to the board, where she worked alongside Nova's leadership and board of directors. And I'm sure that role is going to lead to some really interesting and unique insights. So we have the full spectrum of what it takes to make a circularity real, scientific expertise, a passion for innovation, and actual industrial execution. So I'm going to begin with some very brief perspectives on this scale-up problem, and then generally for chemicals and then also specifically materials. We are plunging into a sector that is really foundational to modern life. The global chemical industry products underpin over 90% of manufactured products, the stuff in our pockets, the packaging for food, you name it. I can't even think of what the other 10% would be, frankly. But a further and somewhat unique challenge, and this was touched upon this morning, is that chemicals and materials are growth sectors, right? It's often missed in discussions of sustainability due to population growth that you mentioned earlier and increased GDP per capita. That's another factor that translates very closely with demand for chemicals. We will see demand for chemicals grow. There is no peak chemicals. There's no dematerialization on the horizon. So what we need is these products that help us in everyday life, but we need them to be more circular and more decarbonized whenever possible. Now, circularity doesn't happen in isolation. It really requires this alignment of, and we heard this morning, science, policy, financing, and industry practice, all that moving together to overcome, which is also often called this valley of death. That's the focus of our conversation today, how to scale these solutions and make the way materials flow through our society quite different. So finally, some quick taxonomy. This is a good thing to do maybe right after lunch. This has been touched upon. But you know the phrase follow the money, but when it comes to circularity, I like to say follow the carbon atom, right? So did it begin its journey as a fossil carbon, but then was extracted from what would have been post-consumer waste streams? We're going to refer to that generally as mechanical recycling. Are we taking that same post-consumer waste, but now we're converting it back somehow into either feedstock or precursor monomers? That's chemical recycling, sometimes called molecular recycling. And finally, are we capturing carbon in its simple oxidized forms of carbon dioxide and carbon dioxide and then converting those into useful compounds? That's the area of carbon capture and utilization. We're going to be discussing all three of those today. So obviously some caveats, there's some overlap of those nuances, and we'll discuss those. So now we're going to begin with each panelist giving a short presentation. We'll go through those, and then we'll have some moderated Q&A, and then we certainly are going to save time for some questions. I'm going to put the challenge out there to the students. Get ready. I want to preferentially come to all the students. I've been known to call on people even if they don't have their hand raised. That usually increases the interest in having a question ready. So I think we're going to start with Adam, and he's going to give the first presentation.
Yeah, so I'm Adam Gross. Recently joined the Andlinger Center beginning of this month, and so I'm going to talk about some of the concepts and broad strokes around chemical recycling for plastic circularity. So a lot of the stuff that I'll be talking about here is sort of reinforcement and additional context for some of the content we heard this morning. So to start off, right, putting chemical recycling in context of the broader plastics recycling ecosystem, right? So if you want to recycle something in general, first you got to get the material, right? You got to collect it. Then you've got to sort it, because typically waste is not coming in as a pure stream, right? You know, our garbage, you know, you have plastic, you have paper, you have cardboard, or maybe organics in there, metal, glass, et cetera. So you've got to do some sort of bulk sorting process to get the material of interest separated from everything else. And then I have another step called priming. You could also call this cleaning, which is basically your initial sorting is very gross level, but it's typically not enough to get it to a point where it's ready to actually fed into a recycling process. There's still residual contamination that has to be taken care of, right? And then once you do all those things, you're actually ready to do a utilization step. I should add that the collect, sort, prime, you know, there's a lot of nuance inside of that. There's a lot of complexity inside of that can vary based on, you know, what type of material you're interested in, type of waste stream it's coming from, you know, whether it's, you know, MSW, municipal waste, or maybe it's construction waste, waste electronics, automotive waste, et cetera. And so how this whole process works is very complex, very nuanced, and can really vary depending on a host of factors. But once you do that, then you're ready to do the utilization. And so utilization, historically, there's been a couple options, right? So at the simplest, it's what I call direct utilization, which is basically taking the plastic, maybe doing some size reduction on it, but then using it as is, as like an agglomerate, or maybe you're melting it and turning it into like pavers or low quality bricks, or maybe blending into asphalt for some like polymer modified asphalt, something like that. But you're not really trying to transform or really clean up the plastic that much. Then you have the tried and true mechanical recycling, which we heard about a bit this morning, and which one of my fellow panelists will talk more about. But basically, once you clean up the feed, you're melting it and re-extruding it, right? So you're just doing a mechanical transformation on the plastic. But there's definitely certain limitations that we heard about this morning touched on with that process. And at the other extreme, you had incineration. So this is like basically energy recovery. So this could be like a waste to energy plant. like our fellow New Jerseyans up near Morristown, Reworld do a lot of, formerly Covanta. Could also be making RDF, refuse-derived fuels, for maybe feeding into a concrete plant to provide power to those to reach those very high temperatures. So it's utilization, but it's not really circular, right? Because you're burning it, you're turning the CO2 and water, and that's just going into the atmosphere. So there's a pretty big gulf between, historically, between like mechanical recycling and incineration. One, you're preserving the plastic and doing very low intensity treatment to it. The other, you're completely obliterating it, burning it, right? To fill that gap is chemical recycling, okay? And that gives you a range of different options of varying intensities, severities, to actually utilize the waste plastic, but still do it in a circular manner, right? So a couple different flavors in there. There's what I call solvent dissolution. This is also called solvent recycling or physical recycling. Basically, you've got this waste polymer in blue, but when you get an article of plastic, a bottle, a film, whatever, it's not just polymer. There's other additives inside there to help its performance. Or you could have a multi-layer where you've got multiple different types of polymers or other materials all tied together in different layers. So what you do is you take a solvent and that dissolves the one or more of the polymers, but leaves behind everything else. So you're able to do better separation than traditional mechanical recycling, but you're not actually doing any intentional bond breaking. So it's like a halfway in between traditional mechanical recycling and full chemical recycling, sort of a physical chemistry approach as opposed to a organic chemistry approach. Then you have selective depolarization. This is the type of process where you're taking your polymer and you're converting it back down selectively into monomers. This can work very well if you can do it, but it's limited by the chemistry of your polymer, right? So your number ones, your PETs, your number sixes, your polystyrenes, this works well for if you can do it. But unfortunately, some of your other major polymers, like your polyolefins, your PVC, it doesn't work just because of the chemistry of those molecules. Then you have pyrolysis, which again, we heard about this morning. This is really where your polyolefins, your 2, 4, and 5s fall in, as well as your PVCs. Here, you're hitting your polymer with high heat, maybe with a catalyst, and you're turning into a range of different products, different molecular weights, or different monomer counts, right? And then you can recover those products, put them through a separation, further post-processing, and then eventually do a repolymerization to make your chemically recycled polymer. And then last, as mentioned, we have gasification, where you're actually turning your polymers into syngas, which is on a platform for making a variety of different products, including polymers if you want to. Okay. So that's sort of the broad range, and I've kind of ordered these through degrees of severity, going from least to most. And so there's a lot of different options out there, and depending on the context of how you're operating, what feeds you're getting, what products you want to make, how capital intensive you want to be, et cetera, you might be pursuing one or more of these options. We can talk about that later on. But just some highlights of how chemical recycling can advance circularity, right? So as we said this morning, it addresses the gaps in mechanical recycling because it's able to handle the feeds that mechanical recycling can't handle, and it makes the products mechanical recycling can't make. So by that nature, it's a complement to mechanical recycling. Right, they're not really competitors. They are working hand in hand to advance plastic recycling, plastic circularity as a whole. In terms of scale up, some kind of broad thoughts. Chemical recycling, definitely lots of opportunities for integration with existing petrochemical complexes, as well as optionality in a lot of cases to, as one of the questions actually asked this morning, instead of maybe having to go back to polymers, you can turn your products into fuels, lubes, and specialty chemicals as well. Both what these last two statements mean is that it's giving you more flexibility in operations to reduce risk, reduce maybe the capital required to build one of these processes, which at the end of the day helps you get to scale faster. Right, and then other challenges to scale, just to highlight on the economic side, and we heard a little bit about this morning. I would say the biggest challenge is a clear, consistent demand for recycled plastics, where you're valuing that material as both plastic and as being recycled, as opposed to just plastic, where it's very hard to compete versus virgin material. And then technical, I would say the challenge is this scaling is really on the sorting and contaminant management piece. You know, waste is dirty. There's a lot of stuff in there, intentional, unintentional. Getting that stuff out, cleaning it up is a big impediment to actually getting a successful chemical recycling process. And all these points we obviously can go into more through the Q&A if people want to. So with that,
Right. Thanks, Adam. So yeah, let's give him a round of hand. Yep. Up there with that. We had asked Adam, is this too close? Could you be okay? To give us a little bit of a primer on chemical recycling. So thanks for that. We're going to go back to some of those topics. All right. Carbon utilization.
So it's great that Adam went first because he gave you kind of that range of what you can do with solid waste today. I'm going to be talking about one application of gasification. For those of you that don't know LanzaTech, we are a company that I think I'm one of the only biologists that's going to be speaking today. Is that true? Okay. I'm a microbiologist. I was a microbial ecologist before I was a microbiologist, so I'm way out there. But LanzaTech, what we do is we harness something that evolved probably around 3.6 billion years ago. This is the Wood-Lungdahl pathway, the ability to take reduced gases like carbon monoxide or carbon dioxide and hydrogen and turn that into everything a cell is made up of and needs. What we do with these ancient microbes is we convince them that they love to grow on gases that we throw at them. You would think of us as a biological Fischer-Tropsch or methanol synthesis. However, we can take all sorts of crap that those prissy heterogeneous catalysts can't take because biology is tough, and biology that has been around for billions of years is especially tough. So we harness a unique cluster. Sorry to the catalyst people. I'm married to one, so I can say that. But we harness a microbe that uses carbon monoxide and produces ethanol. It has to produce ethanol to live, and it produces, of all the carbon it takes in, about 95% of the carbon it spits out is in the form of ethanol. So this thing is tied to, when you can tie something, their whole livelihood, to something you want to do, you get a lot out of them as bacteria. So LanzaTech does this around the world. We do have 6 commercial plants in operation today and a number of pilot and demonstration plants as well. We have plants today, a little closer, okay. We have plants linked to steel plants. So a lot of the blast furnaces around the world that produce steel that make up buildings and infrastructure produce a large amount of carbon monoxide from those blast furnaces. So we basically bolt on our huge bioreactors, think of a brewery kind of, on the back end of a steel mill. We take the blast furnace off gas as is with variability and all sorts of stuff in it, and we turn that into ethanol. That ethanol we either dehydrate and oligomerize to sustainable aviation fuel, but we also produce products. And so this is not science fiction. This happens today. We have partnerships with companies around the world. This is a shirt made in our partnership with On Running. They buy a monoethylene glycol produced from steel mill emissions and produce shirts like this. So this is part of their Clean Cloud campaign, where even the design on the shirt is meant to mimic the emissions coming off of a stack. So this is real. We have real plants, and so the plants I'm going to show you in a minute are not renderings. They are, in actuality, functioning. We make our main product, and our main goal is to break into the sustainable aviation fuel market with a lower carbon intensity than any other option. And we can do that because we can take a variety of gases that other people cannot. We can do that because we can take gases produced from anywhere. As long as it ends up as carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, and hydrogen, we can use it. So you can gasify biomass, you can gasify trash. So from a circular perspective, how do you get to a shirt? You can take this shirt, you can wear it. When it gets gross or holy, you can throw it in a gasifier and make a new shirt. That is what we are enabling here. And so we collect waste, or somebody does. We don't actually do that. That waste is gasified into syngas, like Adam mentioned. So that's carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, and hydrogen. And then our LanzaTech plant ferments that into ethanol. We convert that ethanol into a number of products, a lot of which end up in things you can buy. I do send out an annual Christmas gift list for those of you that are sustainably inclined, where you can figure out all of the recycled carbon products you can buy for your family. So join me on LinkedIn, and I'll post it again this year. And then that then gets eventually converted to material waste. So we're talking to companies like On, like others. So we work with Lululemon, we work with Adidas, we work with a lot of companies that make things that they've decided polyester is what they're going to use moving forward. Like I said, this is probably 1% of the ethanol we make ends up in durable goods, but it's important for people to see it and touch it because it makes it real. Because like I said, a lot of what we're doing today is going to end up in the fuels you need, because you still want to go on vacation to Cancun, especially when you live in the north and you want to go somewhere warm around the holidays or around the new year. And so you also want to buy goods that are made other places. And so our ethanol is also a sustainable marine fuel. So our main products are sustainable aviation fuel and sustainable marine fuel, and we can make that from a steel mill furnace or from gasified goods. So Adam talked a lot about the challenges for chemical recycling come down to how do you get it to one place? How do you clean it? How do you do that? We don't. So it's a dark photo. Imagine a pile of trash. A pile of trash where no single piece of trash is larger than a meter cubed. That is what we're gasifying today in Japan with Sekisui, a waste provider. Today, they incinerate for power or they gasify for power as well. We take a slipstream of that gasified gas and push it through our technology to produce ethanol produced from unsorted municipal solid waste. So this is plastics, this is wood waste, this is food waste. I was there a day, a lot of sea cucumbers came in, like rotten ones. It was terribly smelly and wet, and it still goes right in the gasifier because they have these high temperature gasifiers that can take whatever. It doesn't have to be clean. It doesn't have to be sorted. This is a picture of our pilot plant we deployed in 2014 in the middle here, and on the right is our demonstration plant. So in Japan, to push out a new technology, you have to first demonstrate at a 1/10 commercial scale size, and so that is what you are looking at here. So this plant was built in 2022 and is currently running. So these are real things that we're doing today. What's exciting about biology is when you have unsorted waste, your hydrogen to CO ratios coming off that gasifier are not constant. They are not consistent, and they go all over the map. So for those of you that don't really want to read this slide, the chart on the left shows you a very turbulent line. The chart on the right shows you a flat line. That is the beauty of biology. It can take chaotic inputs and have consistent outputs. And that is why, so people say, Zara, how is the valley of death for you? And I'm like, no, there's 5 valleys of death, and we can get into that in some of the questions. But it is not just about your technology readiness. It is not just about your commercial readiness. It is about the adoption readiness as well. And so there are so many more valleys of death than you know, but we can get through them. We're still kicking. But I think the thing to think about is how. And I think that's what we're going to talk about today, is how to get through all those different ones. But after over 50,000 hours of running on unsorted municipal solid waste, and again, this is not the major part of what we do. We do a lot of work with steel and oil and gas emissions as well. It's that ability to hold on to that unique thing you have and push back against all the alternatives. So anyway, thank you.
See that? Thank you. So we're already over delivering here, and now we're going to have a holiday gift list come out of this. So, right, Jen?
That's right. I think I thought of everything, but didn't figure out how to turn off my meeting notifications on my Surface. So if you hear dinging, it's just because I'm supposed to be in a meeting. Let's see. There we go. All right, so thank you very much. It's really, really, truly a pleasure to be here. It's been a wonderful discussion, diverse discussion so far this morning. As Bob mentioned, I'm Jen Wolfsmith, VP of Sustainability at Nova Chemicals. And today I'm going to talk about primarily mechanical recycling, but with a couple of themes in there. Really, one is about the need for systems thinking and how does everything have to come together to achieve scale, not just one piece or one element in isolation. And the other thing I'll challenge you to think through is taking that science and then creating the application of that science even one step further through to lived experience. Because I think when we actually connect all of those dots, that's when the magic and the scale can really start to take off. And I'll share an anecdote just before I get into the Nova stuff from my personal life. So I work for Nova Chemicals by day. One of the areas that I'm really passionate about in my spare time is organ donation research. And I've got some lived experience, happy to share that context at the break, but I have some lived experience around organ donation and transplantation. And I started becoming engaged in research about 10 years ago, and to the point now where I am, we just submitted a grant, I'm co-applicant, I'm co-author on papers, and the only credential that I have is that I have lived experience. And so in that realm, the scientists and the clinicians have been working together for years. The science is sound, it's good. They hand it off to the clinician that says, how are we going to apply this? What practices and policies at the bedside are actually going to come to be because of this? And now they've extended it one step further to say, what is the lived experience and what are we missing to actually bring this all together in a way that works? And so I'll challenge you to think through that of how can we extend the thinking through to the lived experience so that we really can crack the nut on circularity. So I'll go back to Nova now. So over the past years, Nova has been on a journey of transformation, like many other petrochemical companies and companies, writ large. We really are evolving from a traditional polyethylene producer into what we now call a circularity enabler. And that means we're not only focused on producing, high performance virgin resins, but also on reshaping how plastics are designed, made, and recycled, because we need all of those elements to come together. And really, at the end of the day, what we want to see is keeping the materials in use and out of landfills for as long as possible while building a resilient and competitive business. And so I talked about systems, the systems thinking earlier. We know that there's no single solution to achieving circularity. And again, I think the diversity of the conversation so far today really highlights that it's not a one-size-fits-all challenge, and there's no one company or one technology that really is going to be able to solve it. So we look at it from a multifaceted approach, always grounded in our purpose. And first, designing for circularity. We're enabling the shift from multi-layer to monomaterial packaging solutions, and this really enhances recyclability. It increases the use of recycled polyethylene or RPE, and in the process, it does reduce the carbon footprint along the way. Second, really on delivering recycled content at scale. We supply multiple grades of mechanically recycled polyethylene, including for food contact use, which I'll touch on a little bit more in the coming slide. And our technical experts really do work closely with customers to design packaging that incorporates more recycled content without compromising the performance, which really is critical because at the end of the day, we want the customers not only to pay for the recycled polyethylene, but to pay a premium for this. So we cannot, dilute performance. And finally, collaborating across the value chain. So we work with converters, brand owners, recyclers, and policymakers to bring this all to fruition. And we also invest in global initiatives like Alliance to End Plastic Waste and Operation Clean Sweep, like so many of our peers. But we're here today to talk about scaling circularity. And I think, for us, one of the most exciting examples of that is our new mechanical recycling facility in Connorsville, Indiana. So this was a $150 million investment that opened earlier this year. It's one of the largest and most advanced facilities of its kind. It's capable of processing up to 100 million pounds of post-consumer plastic film annually. That's about 145,000 bales, or the equivalent of about 8,000 fully loaded garbage trucks that's diverted every year. And while this is a significant milestone for recycled content, it really isn't the scale of production and projects that we're used to talking about in the petrochemical industry. We really do have a tendency to take a Texas approach where bigger is always better. We're always looking for economies of scale. And we tend to only applaud the mega projects, the billions of dollars and the billions of pounds. But in reality, we just haven't seen the demand or the market organization within the circular economy to justify those types of projects yet. And so perhaps, another challenge I'll throw out there is we need to be a little more comfortable with celebrating some of these, right-sized investments that are really going to help build the systems and get the circular economy off the ground and allow us to eventually get to mega scale. And if we're going to celebrate one of these appropriately scaled projects, and I know I'm biased here, but Connorsville really is a great candidate. It's just recently received a first of its kind FDA letter of non-objection for food contact use. That's game changing. And it allows our recycled resins to be used in food contact applications, but gives the comfort and sets a new benchmark for safety, quality, and performance in recycled plastics. So it's a game changer not only for us, but it really is a game changer for our customers and the brand owners, enabling them to meet their sustainability goals with confidence. So Connorsville really is a tangible example of how companies can move from pilot to commercial and how mechanical recycling can be done at scale while preserving and even some cases upgrading the value of the material as it moves through the loop. But scaling doesn't happen in isolation. Circularity doesn't happen in isolation. It requires deliberate effort to de-risk investments and build systems that work. One of the most effective strategies we found is securing early offtake agreements, which provide predictable demand and long-term stability. Still, Nova is just one part of a much larger puzzle, and true circularity demands collective capability. From waste collection and sorting, as we've heard, processing, policy, and market development, and consumer engagement. So consider this, 2.7 billion people globally still lack access to formal waste management systems. So that is why frameworks like EPR, Extended Producer Responsibility, that we heard a little bit about this morning, are so critical. EPR helps to ensure that the materials are collected, processed, and reused in an optimized way, creating access to the valuable plastic waste, or feedstock, as we call it, and the infrastructure needed to enable the circular economy. Regulatory clarity, of course, is going to be important. We've heard about that. We'll touch a little bit more on it. But I think finally, what's going to be critical is gaining end user trust. Consumers have to believe that the recycled materials are safe, that the technology works, and that companies like Nova and Dow and many others are driving change for the right reasons. And I think that building that trust is really key to scaling circularity. So with that, I thank you, and I look forward to the Q&A.
Jen. Right, so is this on? Yep. So I have some specific questions for our panelists that are related to their area of expertise. Then we'll hit some more general topics, and then I absolutely am coming to the audience. So again, you're a fair warning. Adam, I'd like to start with you. The whole area of chemical recycling is diverse. There's all these options. And so with the spirit of how we translate these things from labs to commercial, what would be the considerations to decide which one of those options one is doing? So let us in on your design thinking.
Things on? Okay, cool. Yeah, like you said, there's a whole host of different options out there in terms of startups, major companies trying to develop these different recycling processes. I think when it comes down to it, first you have to understand what product you're trying to make, and then what feeds you could potentially have access to, right? So, like I said in my slides, chemical recycling polyolefins is different than chemical recycling PET just by the nature of the molecule, right? They have different chemistries available to them. So the first thing is just screening for what type of plastic you're dealing with, because that really limits the overarching chemical processes you can work with. Then you also understand, okay, what is my feed actually going to be looking like? How pure is it? How clean is it? What's along for the ride, right? What other dirt, product residue, additives, missorted material are going to be in there that I'm going to have to deal with? And how does that translate into additional kit I'll need to install to make my process actually effective, right? And once you do that, that sets a good screening basis for what could actually work. And then it's a matter of doing your kind of standard block and tackling, scale up type strategies for any large scale chemical process, right? What does your heat transfer look like? What does your mass transfer look like? How are you doing product separations and purifications? How are you going to feed the unit, right? All that kind of stuff where it's basic engineering. You just have to go through and do the work and see if everything makes sense. And when you roll it all up into an actual like plant design, is the thing economic, or equivalently, what price point do you need to hit for you to have good economics and be able to go forward with the project, right? And sort of what premium maybe do you need to tack on for someone to be saying, yes, I want to buy your recycled material. I want to buy this recycled plastic. I'm especially after it because it is recycled, not just because it's plastic. Because if you're just trying to compete on price and property, you're never going to beat virgin because that's almost always going to be cheaper, right? So, so those are some of the thoughts and concepts at a high level.
Thanks for taking us through that. So what we see, and I hope this is one of the themes that comes through today, is that these are complex systems in every sense of the word, right? So, that movie that, was famous for saying it's plastics and kind of lumping them all together. Okay, could not have been more wrong. There's lots of different options there. So thank you for that. So the person that was saying nasty things about catalysts.
Have to provoke.
Yeah. So one of the areas of my background is I was in a bio-based materials company that's called the clean tech space. And Zara, you have one of the few companies that has survived, I don't know how many waves of clean tech technology there are. So give us some insight. What did it take? LanzaTech is truly a kind of a relatively narrow list of making it through the waves of clean tech. So
yeah. No, and I is it on? Okay. So LanzaTech's a 20-year-old company. We went public a couple years ago. So we were the first public carbon management company. And whoa, is that a journey? What does it take? I think the ability to, when people tell you no, to go, yeah, but that's a soft no. Right? There's a difference between a hard no and a soft no. We all know this, right? And I think the ability to have that, take your hit and keep on running. For LanzaTech, it's really about, we do good because we honestly believe in it. And it's a bit of a cult as a company because you are surrounded by people that really want to leave the world a better place than they found it. And so there's a bit of that just dumb optimism that we have that I think is pretty good. But it's also the ability to understand technology and do the mental acrobatics so that you can break into century-old industry and help them understand why you are offering an alternative solution that works in a piece of their business. And you just need that one first bit. And then you're like slime mold and they can't get rid of you because then you say, well, this is also an option and this is also an option. And I think one of the valleys of death that we're in right now as a company, to be honest, is that, okay, everybody knows the valleys of death, but you spin out an idea, number one. You do a prototype, you pilot it, so you get to that development stage, and then you deploy it, and then you deploy it more than once. But after you deploy it more than once, after your TRL 9, that's not good enough. Because from a commercial perspective, now you need to drop your CapEx. Now you need to, in the absence of any incentives, be cost competitive with the alternative. And so when you say it's never going to be cost competitive, like there's people working their butts off trying to make things cost competitive because it is the only way, you know, when you live at the mercy of this political pendulum, you have to have line of sight into how can I cut costs in clever ways so that not only can I make something that has a negative carbon intensity from an LCA perspective, but is cost competitive for jet, right? So I'm looking at jet fuel that's $2 to $3 a gallon cost of production. And so we have paths in our nth plants to get close to that in the absence of incentives. But so the valley of death you're in now, right? So you have multiple deployments. It's getting people to understand that the plant I build today is going to be more expensive than the plant I build tomorrow, because that is how development works. And I think the ability to help people see the vision and to stay consistent to it and marry that technology dream with the feet on the ground. This is what we're seeing. These are the steps we're going to take. I think that's how you keep going. It's knowing what you can do in parallel, because if you do everything in series, it's going to take you way too long. And it's also the ability to say no to things that you could do, but will make everything else slow down. So.
Thanks. Getting at those valleys. So let's talk some more about scale of this sector, and Jen's could be able to talk to this. So I'd like to say, this is a sector that we don't measure things in kilograms. We don't measure things in grams. We measure things in metric tons, and actually we measure things in thousands and tens of thousands and millions of metric tons. And then metric ton is not something people think of. So I actually did this math. So a metric ton is a nice sized California hot tub without the people, just the hot tub and the water in it. That's a metric ton. So when we say 1,000, 10,000, 100,000, it's that many hot tubs that we're talking about. So, Jen, getting inside those discussions with your board, with your CEO, sizing that plant, I can tell you from my own painful experience, is so important. You get it too small, it's a problem. You get it too big, it's a bigger problem. So tell us about that process.
Yeah. So you're right. Sizing the Connersville facility was orders of magnitude different, language than when we're thinking about building a new cracker or a new, polyethylene derivative unit. And so it was hard to first get our heads around what the orders of magnitude would be. But the decision to size the Connersville plant, of course, it was driven by our strategic intent. We believed in this. We knew that we could build something special. And so, just like everybody else here and everybody we've heard today, we believe in it fundamentally. But strategic intent isn't enough when you're staring down the barrel of emerging markets. And we have emerging markets on both sides of the ledger. We've got a feedstock that's unavailable, unknown, disparately, randomly around disparate geographic regions. And then on the other hand, we have, very fragmented market signals, no real clarity on pricing, forecast. And when we do forecasts, we do very long-term forecasts in the petrochemical, industry. We're talking about 20-year DCFs plus terminal value to try and forecast pricing out that long. And so we really knew that to get it right, and with the absence of that sort of historical data and the consensus around what does RPE, what will it be valued at, and where will we get the feedstock for it, we really had to take sort of a Goldilocks approach that you kind of referred to: not too big, not too small, just right. And some of the decision factors there were we needed to make sure that it was impactful, that this was not just a demonstration plant, but was commercially, able to make an impact and to start to prove and start to get some tractions for those market trends. If it was too small, it would not be commercially meaningful to start building that data. But we also had to leave room for learning and adaptation. We know that this is plant one. And so how do we, right size it that we can learn and adapt and grow as we move up that curve without risking regret capital? Because I think, I take the responsibility of capital efficiency very seriously, and not just for our shareholders, which of course, demand that of us, but really for consumers and society at large. Because if we overbuild and we spend regret capital, the inflationary pressures just move downstream, and the chances of that having a compound effect of all the different industries that are trying to figure this out all at once and throwing all of that funding we talked about earlier that's raining down into two big oversized projects, that's not going to do anyone any good. So we really had to find that, that sweet spot in between of not too big, not too small, but allows us time to learn and adapt and grow as we, put down the second, the third, the fourth plant.
Thanks. That's deep insight. And, this goes to show you when you see announcements about plants and it's like, well, it was this size, you could tell how much thinking has got to do it. So I'm going to do one more round of questions for each of the panelists, and then all y'all be ready for your questions. Let's switch up the order a little bit. Zara, I'm also a big believer in industrial biotechnology. It's a very cool area. So speculate what will be the big things coming out of industrial biotechnology, the things that you're thinking of to change the world.
It will replace everything. Like
That's
eventually.
pretty bold. We said go bold.
No, I mean, I do think the plasticity of biology inherently, like we're all here because biology is so adaptable, right? Humans didn't just appear, sorry. I told you I was an ecologist to begin with. Just the inherent ability to adjust and adapt, and you throw AI into that, and you throw all these new iterations, and you throw the ability to run experiments before you even step foot in a lab. It's just going to accelerate it. But biology is chemistry. Biology is every product you could ever want. Oil is old algae. It's not dinosaurs. And I think from a biotech perspective, the medical field is going to run fast and come up with things, and then the rest of us are going to pick up those pieces. That's historically how a lot of advances in biology have come about. But now everything's moving so fast that it's going to be much more closely behind from a biomanufacturing perspective. I think it's an exciting time to have those interdisciplinary degree programs that I'm sure Princeton does have, because like from a chemical engineering perspective, having your students have the ability to understand biological systems is really important, because I think the best discoveries historically in bio have been when like a physicist and a biologist sat in a bar and talked about each other's problems. But I do think that it's like the Renaissance is going to have wave 4 and 5 and 6. But I'm a biologist, so, and I have to say this, and I have to be really bold because I know there's not a lot of us in this audience.
We'll find out. Maybe we're going to ask. So let's stay on that side, Jen. You mentioned in passing, we have FDA approval. Okay, this is a big deal, right? So not only about getting that, but the implications, for a mechanical recycling to have FDA approval. So again, put us in the room on all of that.
Yeah. So I think I may be even, more alone in the room because I'm not a scientist or a technical expert. I'm actually an accountant by training. So I will not pretend to go into the deep dive on the technology. Even if I could, there's a lot of intellectual property around this that I shouldn't get into. But what I can say on how did this come to be, how did we make this a reality? Really, it came down to a partnership. a lot of other things in the background. People way smarter than me trying to crack this nut for a long time, but a partnership really enabled it at the end of the day. And Nova knew that when we, started into our mechanical recycling journey quite a few years ago now, we knew that we brought deep expertise in polymer science. And we knew that we brought relationships in the polyethylene market. We knew the polyethylene market and how it behaves and how we can, hopefully get market penetration with recycled products. But we did not have the operational know-how of how to build and operate a recycling facility. And so we partnered with a company called Novalex, who really brought their know-how, their operational and industrial know-how. And, I don't know if we sat in a bar, I'm pretty sure folks along the way did, but if we sat in a bar talking about each other's problems, but that was really the approach that we took of how do we marry the science, how do we mature the process, but make sure we're rooted in the realities and that lived experience of what does operating a mechanical recycling plant actually look like, much different than operating an ethylene cracker, which, we can do that. But the mechanical recycling is different. So I think the FDA letter of non-objection is really the outcome or the evidence of how valuable these strategic partnerships can be. And it is a regulatory win, but it's not only a regulatory win, it really is a commercial unlock because it now opens up markets that were off limits to us for recycling product before. And it's the foot in the door, the door was starting to close. We stuck our foot in there and made sure it didn't close. And now we get to just keep, propping it open a little bit more and a little bit more over time until we really can get that same level of trust in recycled materials.
Great. And congratulations. That's quite an achievement. So Adam, you get to recruit into the wonderful area of chemical recycling. So likewise, what's really cool that's happening in that particular space? It's relatively new, chemical recycling, molecular recycling, advanced recycling, whatever term. All three are used.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think the first wave of plants that opened up, let's say, probably a year or two before the pandemic happened, they've definitely gone through some growing pains. Some have survived, some haven't. But I think the people that have survived, it's showing what it takes to get a successful project and make a successful business, right, in terms of pyrolysis or solvolysis, if you're talking about PET as an example. And now we're sort of in the, let's say, next wave of technology development and scale up for chemical recycling, where we're taking the learnings from the first time through and applying them, as well as, there's been a shift, I think, towards building more in the petrochemical paradigm, like Jennifer was talking about, of building singular, bigger units as opposed to the more modular approach, which was the sort of paradigm before. I think those things can go a long way towards improving economics and helping the industry grow, as well as maybe tighter integration with existing facilities and operations, as opposed to building sort of standalone sites, go it alone approach, which happened in the past. I think if you're building your recycling plant, next to your virgin plant, then you can take advantage of shared facilities, lower costs, just get up and running that much faster.
Yeah, it's a system. Okay, let's see. I have a lot more questions, but I really would love to see if the audience has questions. I think we have runners. So I think you raise your hand, and I'm going to start with students if I find any. All right. No, please go ahead. Is there a mic over here? Oh, we have a student. Yay.
Hi, not a student, a postdoc. Not too bad.
That's close enough. We'll take it.
The question is for Dr. Summers. I'm a microbiologist in this audience.
Yay.
Evolutionary microbiologist, so even better. So quick question. How was your, in these last 20 years where you've scaled up LanzaTech, I'm guessing you're now making many metric tons of ethanol. So what was the tipping point to go from lab to several liters, and how has the scale up happened?
No, and I think the scale up journey is an important one to talk about in those early days. It's get out and get dirty as early as possible. And so once a strain was selected that was pretty good, The founder, so I'm not the founder, but the founder took a really junky reactor that was big enough to a steel mill and said, can you just give me a tiny bit of your gas and let me see if this thing will work? Because you don't know, like a lot of industrial sites that do emit, if you don't measure for it, then it doesn't exist and you don't have to report it. And so growing a biological system on an off gas, you are running the risk of pumping poison into it, because if they don't measure for it, there could be all sorts of things like cyanide and other things that come off steel and ferroalloy production. And so the recognition that there's going to be variability and we don't know how much, and there's going to be contaminants and things that we, don't account for. And so it was get out and get dirty and find those partners as quickly as possible that are willing to entertain some crazy scientists on their site. Understanding that doing that is a burden on that partner, because it's a risk. It's a potential safety risk as well. And so really, before you go out and get that experience in the real world, it was understanding how to talk to them and how to make it make sense for them. Because I think a lot of that translation, that valley of death, that first one, really comes down to, don't make people do the mental acrobatics to understand why you're great. Understand what gets them out of bed every day and how they make money, and then align with what you're doing and how it can only help. Because I think a lot of people don't break into big industry because they say, we have this really great thing, this is what we do. And they're like, great, I don't see how it applies to us at all. And so it was the ability of our founder to do that translation very early that enabled that.
Great question. So, since I'm moderating, I get to editorialize a little bit. You hear what the theme that's coming through here is this early do something, right? If I would express a concern is, as we get better and better at modeling, and I'm all for modeling and do everything on the computers, we get away from this idea of fast prototyping. And fast prototyping does not mean asking ChatGPT to draw it. It means getting out there and doing it, and then getting feedback from what the physical testing of the idea. So great example. All right, I think, yeah, go ahead. You waited patiently.
Thanks. Sarah Glavin, Andlinger Center Fellow. Actually, I am a biologist as well. And I would just add that...
Biologists are in the room. Do we? Yes. Okay. Well, I got 50% have asked questions, just saying.
Before I ask my question, I just have a comment that biology is also going to make things that we haven't even thought about yet. It's definitely gonna rule the chemical industry someday. But my question is for Jen, and it's also pulling on that regulatory aspect, because I don't know if everyone fully appreciates the reason why what you're saying is important about getting the FDA approval. And I think it crosses all types of circular manufacturing, whether you're making something with biology or you're recycling plastics. And I work with startup companies in the industrial biomanufacturing space, and I don't think they understand that when they make the chemical and they're trying to sell it to someone that's going to integrate it into their product line, if they haven't shown that it's safe, if it's going to go into food packaging, or if it's going to go into a landfill, that it's just dead in the water. They're not going to have an offtake agreement. So I was just wondering if you could offer any perspective or lessons learned for folks in the audience that are thinking they might want to do some kind of startup company in the chemical space, students, postdocs that need to consider the regulatory environment way at the beginning of what they're doing.
Could you explain no objection, what that means?
Yes, I can. Yes, absolutely. First, how many accountants in the room? No. So I am by no means the expert in these areas, but I can certainly share my experience. So I think with the regulatory from the regulatory side of the question, there is fragmentation. The fragmentation of the regulatory landscape not just, I'm from Canada, I'm Canadian, so we have a much smaller, landmass and population to manage, and we still are extraordinarily fragmented. When you move down into the United States, it's, orders of magnitude different. And one of the issues, I think, if you don't think about it, early enough, is not only that sort of that chain of custody as it moves through, right? If you can get that certification and regulatory agreement very early in the process, then you really just have to protect the chain of custody as it moves through all the iterations, and not push that downstream all the way through the value chain to have to replicate and reprove and redo. So it really is efficiency as it moves through the chain. And you're right, nobody is going to risk getting to step. If you think about the chemical process, getting to step 8 and finding out, oh, we didn't do the right thing back in step 1 of the value chain. And so it's a great point to highlight. And the reason we were able to actually get the FDA, letter of non-objection is because of the know-how, but because we also understood the regulatory frameworks. We understood how to navigate them. We understood what they were looking for in substance, not just in form. And what was tried and true and tested. So excellent point to really think about that early on, because it can take you down if you haven't thought of it. From a non-objection perspective, I actually have to say, I don't know technically the legal definition, but I will get it for you.
Medicines, drugs are typically approved.
Yes.
Medical instruments get clearance. You can't say my instrument's been approved. It's been cleared by FDA.
Yeah.
So this is a new one for me.
Yeah, and it's the official title, the letter of non-objection. But I will happily get that information, and I'll make sure to find you this afternoon and pass it along.
I can maybe explain it a little bit.
Yes.
Basically, the FDA has, for recycling plastic, mechanical recycling plastic, if you want it to be in food contact, or I guess like for medical use too, I would imagine, FDA has a screening process where they basically dope in contaminants into the waste plastic. You got to run it through your process and then show that you've successfully removed, a certain amount of all those contaminants that they doped in. And if you pass, you get this LNO, this letter of no objection, that says, yes, you're allowed to use this for food contact applications. That's, at a very high level, that's what it is. And the EU has something very similar.
And this is, so thank you very much. But to me, is there an approval? I think that was, what's the difference between the non-objection from a legal perspective?
I've only see it phrased as an LNO, letter of non-objection. I've never actually seen, a stamp of approval. It's a stamp of no objection.
Okay, that was what I was going to clarify for you.
Yeah, so to stay on this theme, and then we'll go to the next question. This again gets at this idea that we tend to think of a product, but it's this product application binary that most of the time we're trying to navigate, right? So polyethylene is polyethylene, but it's different polyethylene if it's going to be food contact. Medical applications have another pathway that they have to go down. It could be the same material, but it has to do different things. So there's some complexity there. I can't see that it did some funny thing there, but I got a couple more minutes. Good. Okay, so more audience questions? Yes. We just need to hand the mic back there and then there. Why don't we go 1, 2? Whoever is fastest.
Yeah, thank you. Richard Moss. I'm a non-resident fellow here at the Andlinger Center. I first just wanted to endorse what you said about the importance of rapid prototyping and lived experience. They both are so important in understanding what actually can and can't work. And we're doing a lot with that, trying to create learning loops that help different communities work together to implement. So I just wanted to applaud that. I guess the question I have is, based on the observation that policy oscillation and uncertainty is not going away. It's an uncertainty we're going to have to deal with. And so I'm just curious how you're thinking about it in terms of strategies. Is there a role for, stronger and bigger industry coalitions? I guess partly it depends on what the sources of opposition are. Are you being undercut as you try to develop more expensive recycled products and see them used in the market, or how you think about that?
Yeah, so this is I think to get the panel ready, we'll let each of you answer that from your point of view, right? So this uncertainty, you heard the old joke like, yeah, I sleep like a baby, I wake up every 2 hours crying, right? So that's what it feels like. So yeah, how are we dealing with this uncertainty? So let's go this way. Go ahead.
So I think to start with, in the U.S. at least, we're at an interesting moment where we actually are starting to see, EPR, extended producer responsibility laws coming to play. I think it just launched in Oregon, coming soon. It's already been passed, but it hasn't actually gone into action yet. California, Maryland, Maine, a handful of other states. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. I think ultimately it's a good thing. The challenge would be the fractured nature, right? The different states have slightly different laws. They're not all aligned with each other. And so you're actually seeing industry groups, like the ACC, the American Chemistry Council, come out and say, we want EPR, but we want homogeneous, standardized EPR everywhere, so we don't have to deal with this patchwork of regulations. It'll, really simplify us and give certainty to the entire situation. So it's definitely a challenge, but I think at the end of the day, good policy is definitely something that will help boost circularity and help scale up and give a push to the entire industry.
Sarah?
And I think the way, like, we're on a break with the U.S. right now, right? As a company, you can't live in the environment you're in right now and make strategic business decisions. So we've done a lot of work in Europe and the UK recently. And I think what's exciting there is they are making movements, but I think everybody's so shell-shocked from all of the geopolitical madness that they're saying, well, it's not going to stick, is it? And so what we're seeing is we see the mandates come, and those should be massive tailwinds. And I think what we're in now is this uncertain period of, but are they going to stay? And so I think what we've done with some of our partners, especially in Europe and in India, India is. I just had a conversation today about how focused they have become on sustainability. There are going to be places that push forward regardless of what's going on in the US. And I think as businesses, everybody's now become a global business because of that, which makes it really hard to schedule Teams meetings. But between India and Europe, I'm dying. But I think what the only thing we can do is push forward. And when you do talk to policymakers, when you do put out perspectives, it's really, really what we have found works really well is helping people understand there's a difference when you create policy around solutions versus policy around outcome. And when we see policy roll out that's about outcome and they're not prescribing a solution, that's where innovation is enabled. That's where new ideas are breaking through. That's where little companies, big companies, everybody has a fair shot. And I think that's what's really exciting right now about Europe and UK and like some of the SAF mandates is they're not prescribing what type of SAF is going to go. They're saying there is recycled carbon fuel, there is e-fuel, there is they're including any path and some that haven't even been thought up yet. Because what they're going after is the outcome, is the carbon intensity of that end product. And those are the policies I think that will endure and that will create this innovation environment that I think we're all like excited for. But yeah, just.
Thank you. Jen, on uncertainty.
Yeah, uncertainty is just what we live in now. And I think there's a bit of an element of that we have to accept that. And I don't disagree. We need to get industry associations and make sure they have the right data and that the science backs it, and that the folks who need to hear what the data and the science are telling us, that they understand it. I think, again, if I put myself in their shoes and the lived experience, I think they have a whole host of folks yelling at them in 360 degrees, all wanting them to move in a different direction, which doesn't help. So I do think there's just an element of we're going to have to accept this, and so how do we adapt, and how do we respond, and how do we make business decisions within those within that environment? I have a bias to business cases, but it really, I think it comes down to what's your scenario planning? How are you thinking about the different alternatives? How are you risk adjusting your assumptions to make sure that you aren't going to get blindsided by something, or equally, you don't think something's catastrophic, that there's an easy mitigation that you can just layer in and say, you know what, if that happens, it's actually not that big of a deal. Here's my backup plan. We can keep moving in that direction. So I think scenario planning, really understanding the drivers of the market, not just in the first order, but the couple of orders upstream of what's driving it, will help us live through this period of uncertainty. Because as much as I wish it was going away, I don't know that it actually is anytime soon.
I don't think it is. So yes, you'll be waiting patiently. A quick 1-minute question, and then we're gonna have a closing comment.
Yeah, okay. So question, Robert Sokolow.
Oh, okay, Rob, go ahead.
I had the mic. Robert Sokolow, Princeton
Rob.
University. The bar, one of the chains began with the word collect. And the question is this: prior to collect, there's what did you make in the first place? There's a phrase that I remember from a while back called "design for recycle," which means you really try to have a conversation with those who are planning to add two metals together that maybe didn't have to be added together, things of that sort, so that the job becomes easier. Does that system boundary that extends toward the production actually exist anymore?
Wow, that would be worthy of an entire panel, Rob. You picked a really important topic. So what do we? I think go ahead, and then I'm gonna get to you back there.
Design for recycling is huge in circularity, making the recycler's job easier, getting rid of materials that don't need to be there, materials that make the recycler's job that much harder, whether that's different types of polymers or other sort of bulk materials, or whether that's additives that are harmful to the recycling process. And there's subtleties there, right? Because there could be design for recycling that makes all of recycling easier. There's design for recycling that makes it so instead of having to do chemical recycling, now I can do mechanical recycling, which is going to be a big win because the energy demands and the economics of mechanical recycling are typically going to be superior to chemical recycling. So packaging design, material design, all that sort of stuff is huge when it comes to enhancing circularity. And like you just said, that's a whole that's a whole panel, that's a whole research area, and that's something very active in industry and academia right now.
Thank you. So I'm going to pull a Chris card, and even though we're at time, because you've been waiting patiently, go ahead.
Hey, thanks so much. I think my question is similar. I was wondering, in terms of the Indiana plant, what was on that land before? Was it developed? Was it a brownfield? Was it farmland? And thinking on a large and futuristic scale, when you build these plants, do you have a plan for their demise that would include something like restoration ecology to bring the land back to either its former state or even an improved and restored state? Because for myself, say as a consumer, that would be what inspires me.
Jen, you'll have the final word on the
it's a great question, and what you mentioned about reclamation of the land is part of our DNA in the chemicals industry. Certainly on our ethylene and polyethylene sites, it's a big area of focus. How do we bring that land back at the end of its useful life? For the Indiana plant and for recycling, mechanical recycling in particular, I'm happy to report it's a very contained process. It's really it's a giant Amazon warehouse with some equipment inside. The chemistry isn't happening there. It's very easy to contain it. It's not perfect. We still have to be very careful with Operation Clean Sweep, which is making sure no pellet goes outside of our boundaries. But that is much easier to contain. And I would say when we're thinking about where to place these plants, it really has more to do right now with where the feedstock availability is. Because again, you can put an Amazon warehouse, wherever you need to. Indiana was very strategically located to be able to pull the high quality, clean feedstock that we knew we needed to achieve the FDA letter of non-objection, and be able to aggregate it efficiently and effectively from a logistics perspective. So that was really more of the consideration of placing and how we put these plants down.
Thanks, Jen. So now we are at time. I had one more question, but you can ask them during the break. You're at Thanksgiving dinner, American Thanksgiving, and Aunt Alice says, "What the heck do you actually do, and why is it important?" So that's the break to ask the panelists the question to ask during the break. So this has been wonderful. I'd like to thank these three experts for sharing their insights, and I guess we're off to break.